Thanks again, Doug. I'm Jack Haley. I'm the Vice President here at AUSA for Meetings and Membership, and it's my privilege to introduce our first panel. So Mackenzie, you guys can come up and take your seats. Our first panel of the day is titled Efficiency, Lethality, and Autonomy, Building the Future Army Now. This panel discussion will delve into how the Army is integrating autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics into its formations to enhance both efficiency and lethality. The panel will explore the acquisition and procurement models being used to accelerate the adoption of these cutting-edge technologies, ensuring that our forces remain at the forefront of innovation. Additionally, the discussion will highlight the importance of enabling multi-domain operations through data-centric contracting approaches, digital engineering, and modular open system architectures. These strategies are essential for building a future Army that is not only more capable and lethal, but also more adaptable and resilient in the face of emerging threats. To lead this discussion, we have Ms. Mackenzie Eaglen, Senior Fellow, American Enterprise Institute, as the moderator. Mackenzie is a Senior Fellow at AEI, where she works on defense strategy, budgets, and readiness. She is also a member of the U.S. Army War College Board of Visitors, a member of the Commission on the Future of the Navy, and serves on the U.S. Army Science Board. Ms. Eaglen served as a staff member on the National Defense Strategy Commission, and before joining AEI, Mackenzie worked on defense issues in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, at the Pentagon, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and on the Joint Staff. Mackenzie has a master's from the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown and a BA from Mercer University. Mackenzie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first panel. I appreciated building off, I think, what was a great keynote speaker. I'm going to be very brief in the bios because I feel like you're here because of the bios, and so we don't really need to spend a lot of time on them. But immediately to my left is Mr. Chris Manning, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Research and Technology in ASALT. Before that, he was with the GA doing the EEPEG work, and prior to that, Director for Science and Technology Integration at DEVCOM. To his left is General Anthony Gibbs, Director of Integration at the soon-to-be renamed Army Transformation and Training Command. Before that, he was PEO Ammo, and prior to that, with PEO Soldier, and before that, also ASALT. And lastly, we have Dr. Amber Walker, a Senior Vice President of Ground, C2, and Maritime Systems at Parry Labs. Before that, she was at Anduril, at Raytheon, at DARPA, and is an officer currently in the U.S. Army Reserves. So welcome everyone to the panel this morning. We're not breezing over your bios because they're not important, but because it's why we want to hear from you and all your brilliant ideas. I guess I actually have a bunch of questions where I sat up late last night thinking, let's dive in. But I actually would rather get a reaction to our keynote from Army Contracting Command. So thoughts and takeaways on what's changing or what you're seeing based on what we just heard this morning. We'll just go down the line.
All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. As I think about how can we transform our systems and processes, and I think about innovation in the world I live in, really think about technology innovation quite a bit. And so how do I think about technology innovation? I kind of think it in two types. Kind of evolutionary and revolutionary, and kind of two channels in each one of those. And the evolutionary, hey, how are we incrementally improving the systems we have? And then the other approach being, hey, we have a defined problem, a known gap that we're going after to try to address. And so there's a really evolutionary change. And as I look at our systems, processes, and structures in the Army, I think they are really designed to get after that change. Flipping over to the revolutionary side, it's, I think about innovation as to how do I solve a problem that I did not know I had, right? My systems aren't built for that particularly. And then how do I repurpose existing technology to solve a problem that, or to serve a purpose other than what it was designed for? So I rapidly inject there. And so this gets after how do I take more of a shift from an industrial age model, where our systems and government have been kind of designed around that, and move to an information age model. I think you're seeing some of that in the Chief's initiative regarding transformation and contact. It is take the current technology that is available at some level of maturity iterate on it and say, what can I use this for? And how can this change the way we fight as an Army? And so that's where I really think about innovation, and the conversation that's going on right now in the Army is what are the changes we need to do in processes, systems, and structure to get after that second part of innovation? How can we be more revolutionary? How can we rapidly accelerate technology for our force?
General, any reaction to General Lowry's comments? Any part of it?
Yeah, within Army Futures Command. Within Army Futures Command, we're doing several things to really make us faster at delivering capability at the speed of relevance. For one thing, we're leveraging commercial technology much more so than in the past. One of the things that I've learned in the short time that I've been in Army Futures Command is there's a tremendous amount of private investment going into the defense space right now. Everything from unmanned systems, AI, autonomy, munitions, C2, counter C2, UAS, or I already mentioned UAS, but counter UAS. So we have a tremendous opportunity to leverage this investment. So it's important that we can quickly evaluate these technologies and then scale those into production when needed. Second thing is we're really doubling down on the use of mechanisms like OTAs and CRADAs, where companies are willing to self-invest. That allows us to put these mechanisms in place and get capability out there to units and in the hands of soldiers to get that feedback from the ground up. And then the third way is we're taking a new approach to requirements. Much like the statement of objectives, a broad statement for soliciting from industry, we're using a new mechanism called the characteristics of need statement to define broad problem areas to generate that discussion with industry. And then within that, what we see in the future is moving towards directed requirements, CDDs or annexes to refine those requirements that spin out of those prototyping efforts. We're also using very much of a bottoms-up approach, working directly with units, transformation and contact. I'm sure you all are familiar with working directly with units, hearing from commanders and soldiers in the field about what they need. That is driving requirements as well, so that we're not late to need with the technologies we provide. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me be the voice of industry on today's panel. Probably a different perspective in some ways. From where I sit, I think some of the changes in the Army in the last, we'll say 6 to 9 months have been largely positive. I've done the Army my entire adult life in some form or another, and I don't think I've ever seen the Army be as open in its communication with industry as I've seen in the past 6 to 9 months. The level of access to senior leaders, decision makers. I spend quite a bit of time driving between here and Aberdeen, spending time in the offices there. I think Next Gen C2 and what Army Futures Command has done and transition has been a big part of that. Between the AARs and the Project Convergence capstone kind of rehearsals and events, it's really helped at least our company at Parry, and I think a lot of industry, better understand the warfighting problems that you're trying to solve and how we can best self-invest ahead of need. So I'm excited about, I think, the open invitation that TIC has offered to industry to show up, right? Bring our best materials, solutions, try before you buy. And it gives us several different bites at the apple, which is something, if you've ever seen me on previous panels, is I think a key way to entice competition and keep industry involved, right? Is to allow multiple places and times and ways to win. The one piece of that I'll say, and I'm sure other folks in the room are wrestling with this, it's wonderful to lower the barriers of entry. I think it's what the nation needs. On the industry side, it also changes our competition calculus quite a bit. And so I think that is something that we're all reconciling with. I have not seen, prior to the last few years, solicitations regularly come in with somewhere between 100 and 600 vendors. I think that's what was quoted on the latest X-Tech Cyber Overwatch. So just an extreme amount of interest, which I think is something we're all positive and negative about when we think about our odds.
That's right. I think the goal, as stated by the Secretary, quite making headlines, was to strengthen and broaden the industrial base, right? And there may be some disruption as part of that. I think that I did not know those numbers. That's fascinating. Right. So there's a lot of guidance. So transformation and contact came up. General Lowry's comments about sort of how things are trickling down. He didn't say these words, but they're in the Army Transformation Initiative guidance, in the procurement EOs out of the White House. There's a lot of guidance, and there's a lot of internal reviews, 8% budget scrub to reprioritize, the deputy secretaries relook at similar themes, commercial when available, streamlining the civilian workforce in particular, of which I know contracting, of course, has a lot. The Army arguably has been on a wartime footing for contracting. I think for really once the war in Ukraine started, I'll give the Army a lot of credit, unlike its sister services. But still, there's a lot of reform and churn and change underway in this moment. So how are you, we'll get to AI in a little bit specifically, but I guess kind of how is it with this last 6 months of change, how is that impacting your day-to-day jobs on the ground every day, doing what each of you do, because it's a little different?
Okay, to focus on the reform part of that. So, and tie it back to kind of my initial reaction regarding different types of innovation. I know CIBR came up, so we look at our innovation programs in the Army. CIBR Sitter, X-Tech, I would say also our tech maturation initiatives and our ManTech programs. And what we've done for a long time on those programs is go to PEOs or labs and say, what's your problem? What's your problem? And then we go put the problem out there and say, hey, how can you help with this problem? So as the secretary challenges us to have a more venture-centric approach, as to look broadly, look outside, we're thinking about that differently. And we're saying, hey, maybe what we need to do is first look outside and say, what do you have? And how can we apply it? And how do we iterate rapidly with units and soldiers to go, is this thing useful? And so this is how I think about reform regarding our innovation programs, and what are the systems and processes that need to change? Do I already have the authorities to do this along this approach? I think I do. And it's a matter of how do we change our mindset, and then how do we change our processes to get after that?
Really quickly before General Gibbs, what happens when you meet with company X, small business, never done work with the department, or it's talking to a bigger company, and you knock on the door of Dr. Walker, pretend she works for the Army, and you say, I have this great thing, Commander X, you should buy it.
Yeah, so how I think about that is that, hey, if there's a useful technology that comes in, first of all, we want to do some technology due diligence, I'll call it, as to there may be 10 other companies that also have something in that space, and we should consider all of them and iterate with soldiers and find which is most promising, and then figure out the path forward. And so some of that may be what we're thinking about in innovation programs is, hey, what's the right channel? Is it a small business? Can I use CIBR to go after it? Is a prize competition most effective? Is this something from a larger company that I can use prototyping dollars and our tech maturation initiative, do some initial prototype to get some feedback. But I think step one is that technology due diligence to go, all right, there's promise here, then iterate with soldiers, and then figure out based on the results of that, well, what's the path to scale?
Yeah, so looking at reform, there's a number of things. So within AFC, obviously the big thing that we're doing right now is merging with TRADOC to stand up Training and Transformation Command. As we do that, we are also working very closely with the acquisition community. It's premature to really comment on anything associated with acquisition reform. But what I would say is that we are watching that very closely to make sure that particularly our labs are very closely aligned to the new PEO structure, whatever that might end up being. Back to the requirements. I talked about the use of characteristics and needs statements a bit already, but there's a number of other things that we're doing to make our requirements process more agile. One is we've implemented a process called CORA, or Continuous Objectives Requirement Analysis, which is just AROC backwards. How do we look at requirements from the reverse perspective? We built an analytics tool over the past year that allows us to see all of the Army's requirements, search and analyze those requirements using a large language model. It ties it to the funding in the equipping peg, the sustaining peg, and the training peg. so we can see where all the resources are. And that allows us to go in and do analysis and figure out what maybe no longer be valid, what might be redundant. In fact, we're working through a task from the Secretary of the Army right now to review all Army requirements with that goal, looking at what we can invalidate to free up resources. So that's one of the big things that we're doing. We're also using directed requirements more so. Really over about the past 3 years, we've been doing this to be able to respond to emerging requirements. Finding the resources is always the challenge in the year of execution, but this allows us to at least get the requirements in place to go leverage commercial tech that is available now and get that informations. Talk the characteristics of need statements. We're pretty excited about this approach. And what we're seeing from industry. The challenge, however, is when we issue broad problem statements, what we tend to get is solutions that don't neatly fit into the existing requirements or categories of things that we expect to buy. And so that's one of the challenges that we're working through is how do we open up the requirements trade space so that we can better consider these really innovative solutions that new companies are bringing to the table. I would comment just briefly on the X-Tech Overwatch process that Mr. Manning and Ms. Walker mentioned already. This is a AFC initiative partnering with ASALT, really in the area of unmanned systems. We received 640 white papers to this initiative, so really a tremendous response to that. We went through and down selected to the top 40 most promising solutions. This summer, we're pairing those companies up into teams in a collider event in October, and then we have an unmanned systems summit in October, where we're going to select the top 20. So the top 40 got a $20,000 cash award through X-Tech. The top 20 coming out of the Unmanned Systems Summit will get a $15,000 cash award. They'll be eligible for up to $2 million in SBIR funding. But I think most importantly is we're going to pair these technologies up with TIC units and get them out into the field and in the hands of soldiers. And in parallel, we're working very closely with the acquisition community to try to create a program plan. The challenge with innovative solutions, working from the ground up, is often that transition into a program of record and taking it into production and scaling, having the resources lined up, the requirements in place to do that. So those are all the things that we're doing.
So I love the idea that the Army is going to start looking outside first. And I think there's a couple models I've seen work fairly well. One that I think would help with some additional communication is the use of requests for information as part of tech scouting. It is very difficult most of the time to understand the true purpose of an RFI, despite what might be written on it. And if we understood as industry that RFIs were maybe seeding a database or providing a resource for this tech scouting type initiatives, I think you would get a different type and maybe different quality of response than when it's assumed to be for a sources sought or just general market research. Because now we have some understanding that, okay, this response may live beyond this next 10 minutes, right? Or it might live beyond this program office and into a PEO. And so I would love to see, more of the scout card type approach that Vulcan and some of the SOCOM units have used, I think, successfully in the past. And then, I think General Gibbs mentioned the wonderful thing about capability of need statements is it allows us to get really creative in how we go after solving the problem and the team that we bring together. I would say the biggest challenge is that big problems cost big money. And sometimes the statements are so broad that it's difficult to understand, how can I get inside of the budget box on this particular activity? And so while I'm not suggesting we want to go to the old days of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 requirements, any kind of prioritization or threshold objective, I think would be helpful as, we in industry try to balance the desires with the budget or constraints.
So, thank you. What I'm seeing emerging, the talk is of getting to things that scale. And in theory, you will overcome with this foot on the gas in terms of focus of effort, changing processes, acquisition scrubs and then more money, you vanquish the valley of death in theory. What I see coming ahead, I wonder, Amber, we can talk later, is a capital infrastructure gap, which is getting the financing for basically the real estate for companies to scale. Separate issue. We'll talk about that later. Maybe, maybe not. But I do want to talk about the influx of funds. So we live in a time of paradoxes and a time of great churn, as we've discussed. So a defense budget that's below inflation, but then a once in a generation reconciliation bill for defense, which will plow anywhere from 125 to 150 billion into the armed forces. The intent is most of it will be spent in the next 2 years. It's 10-year money, but the intent is that Congress expects it to be spent, the majority, in 2026 fiscal year. So the House Armed Services, House Appropriations Chairman, Subcommittee on Defense, just recently talked about the innovation triad and kind of one of the justifications behind reconciliation. And he characterized this as a combination of DIU, sort of scaling and doing more, putting more money behind those kinds of efforts. He talked about, obviously, the Office of Strategic Capital as, a private financing arm, essentially loans, guarantees, but also just backing up. Although I'd argue, again, it can't scale yet significantly. And then the AppFit, accelerating the procurement and fielding of innovative technologies. So the intent is there. Congress has said, Army, put your foot on the gas. Waive the rules, go faster in everything, fast fail, make mistakes. We're not going to hang you out to dry. That's what they're saying. And then now here's the money. Are you guys tracking? Is this trickling down? Are we ready to spend? Is the blitz coming? Thanks.
Yeah, so I am tracking all three of those efforts. The Army's had some positive success on AppFit as to, in particular, when we get a directed requirement coming out of Army Futures Command and we don't have dollars programmed because it's coming that year and we want to go buy it. We've taken a number of those up through the AppFit process to get OSD dollars to go buy those things. So that's a success story of part of that triad. We continue to work and engage DIU. We too see a lot of money going into DIU and say, hey, how can we leverage this most effectively for Army problems? And then the Office of Strategic Capital, we're really excited about that. I think their loan program is just now getting off the ground. So we actively engage that. My innovation programs lead, Dr. Matt Willis, is connected right at the hip with them to go, hey, how are we providing them input from an Army perspective of what are important areas to get after? So.
Yeah, so I have experience mostly working with DIU, worked with AppFit indirectly, and have seen some successes there. With DIU in particular, what I see is they are working the cross-cutting problems that a lot of times it's hard for the services to get to, and especially working across the services at joint problems. In fact, I just met with the team at DIU yesterday to talk about what they're doing on autonomy, in particular, collaborative autonomy of unlike systems. That's one of the big problems that I think we really need to crack to unlock the potential of unmanned systems. One of the other things that I think we really need feedback from industry on is the business model with all this, with this new investment. Autonomy, for example, how do we monetize that and make that a valuable business case for industry? There's a lot of investment going into this right now. But I think what we've learned is current expectations out there of a licensing approach per vehicle, in addition to the autonomy stack on an unmanned system, makes it unaffordable to scale across the Army. So how do we get to a as a service or a consumption-based model so that it becomes profitable for industry, but also affordable for the Army? And another thing that we're focused on is I'd call it a new approach to MOSA, and that is just a couple of years ago, we talked a lot about defining government standards and having industry built to that. And we've shifted more towards an industry consortium approach. If the government doesn't know best, and we're gonna slow industry down if we get in industry's way. And so ideally what we would like to see is self-forming teams out there, industry coming together to define the standards. Big thing that I work at AFC is human machine integration. And so that data standard for message flow between unmanned systems the algorithms to control unmanned systems out there so that we can get away from a one-to-one control and get to that one-to-many that we're really aiming for. So those are the things that I think about.
Thank you. Quick clarification. You say consumption-based model.
Mhm.
I think people could hear three different things. For example, does that mean buying more things as services, or is something else, or is that part of it?
I'm thinking more of cloud services, and as we use a particular company's autonomy stack, for example, their algorithms. How do we get to a point to where we pay as we use those algorithms, or pay as we use cloud services, or pay as we move data around? That is something that we really haven't cracked the code on, I would argue, as we scale really a capability like next gen C2 into the Army, and are leveraging services all the way from tactical cloud, tactical compute out at the tactical edge, all the way to reach back into cloud services to do the larger computing tasks. That's one of the things that I think we really need insight from industry on, again, how we make it affordable for the government, but also profitable so that we continue to see the investment that we see there.
It's not trickling. It's definitely kind of coming down with a vengeance. I think it's good. We're all trying to understand what it changes in current plans, in addition to what it might open up in terms of future opportunities. I think the biggest risk to many in industry today is just the long laid plans now being in question. It is very difficult already to forecast in defense if you've sat on the other side of the table. And things like this, while necessary, disruptive, chaotic, absolutely probably the right technological next step, it does throw business models, into a frenzy, trying to figure out how to react and what might stay the same and what might change. And it is difficult to read minds. I think in terms of the business models, I've been in 3 different companies now, all software based, all with different go-to-market models. There is no one size fits all. I think there's very tangible questions around how dual use is the technology really, because now you have a larger market to kind of balance out the consumption based highs and lows on defense. I think it's a question of, to what level is it truly modified COTS versus almost custom built? And then what is the scale of the opportunity? I think one of the challenges that we've seen from Parry Labs perspective is a lot of software is going to necessarily be better purchased at an enterprise level, even for edge platforms, but we don't have program offices or acquisition authorities today that are ideally suited to do those enterprise level buys. And so we're buying, the same real-time operating systems, the same partitioning infrastructure, the same software 7 times inside the PEO for 7 different programs out of 7 different PEs. And neither the industry nor government can really accomplish the economies of scale in that model. So something to consider, I think, as software continues to become a larger piece and a more common shared piece across a disparate set of combat systems.
I think it will be extremely important for the Army, whose eyes, not because, just because of the sheer volume of purchases that the Army makes per year relative to the other services as more capital intensive, to show quick wins under reconciliation, partly because, we're living in a world where it's not a full appropriations bill anymore. And I expect 26 will do the same, where it's not a full appropriations, not quite a CR. This is essentially moving towards flexible, agile funding, portfolio-based funding, whether everyone's ready or not. And if it fails, 27 could just reverse this all very quickly, this grand experiment, I would argue, which nobody would want. I want to talk about the Unleashing Drone Dominance memo, but there's so many questions. So I'll save my moderator list. I'll come back to it if we don't finish these before the end of the panel. And if anyone wants to reference the memo and the UAS industrial base, please, let's do that. The first question is from Laura at National Defense Magazine for you, General. Can you speak to the future of cross-functional teams? Are they being eliminated or possibly absorbed and restructured? And can you clarify the legacy of these?
Yes, I don't want to get ahead of our leadership on the future of the cross-functional teams, but I think what you will see is closer alignment within the requirement space and alignment to what we're now calling the warfighting systems. I think that's going to do a number of things. Right now, what we've seen with the CFTs is we've had tremendous success with the Army signature modernization efforts. But we will also have multiple different organizations speaking on behalf of requirements in the same space. So there is a goal of kind of cleaning that up and having speaking with one Army voice when it comes to requirements within those warfighting systems.
Is for any of the panelists from Anonymous. There seems to be a lot of change. That's been a theme of our panel, I think, so far. And we're cheering efficiency and expediency, creating steps. But what are the diminishing returns, or what about them? So we've talked a little bit about the requirements, and what do you see as the good enough solution here? And how do you know if you're meeting the goal? And assessing the impact of all of this change. I hope I didn't butcher that question too much.
Yeah, I'll take this one on first. So a few months back, Headquarters DA tasked Army Futures Command to work with the other stakeholders across the Army to develop a process to evaluate and get promising technologies into our TIC formations. We call it the S&T TIC Accelerator. And so we've developed a methodology, and we've already done our first data call to the labs to reach out there and evaluate what's ready to go right now. We're about to do the same thing with industry. And then we go through a process to evaluate against a number of factors, get those companies or technologies paired up with TIC units. And in parallel, I think this is the important piece where we need to improve, and that's developing the learning demands associated with these new technologies, so that when we get to a CTC rotation, we are focused on looking at specific things. And we have a good assessment coming out of those train ups and those CTC rotations. And then on the backside, the other thing that we're working to do is create a transition path into the acquisition community. So scaling is something that I think we need to improve upon. We've been working a brigade and a division at a time. Work one, move on to the next one. And moving very fast. I know a lot of companies want to get in on that action. What we have to do is create paths so that we can take the promising technologies into production and scale up, and actually create enduring change for our Army versus kind of modernizing one brigade or one division at a time in different ways across the Army. Because ultimately, we want the transformation to be enduring, and we want to have interoperability across our Army formations.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on Tony's comment on the pathway to scale, right? So I think that we talk about the valley of death or the valleys of death, and I think a lot of that happens because we plan in these individual silos, and so I think part of that pathway to scale to be effective is to have the pathway to scale plan or options right at the beginning, when we're like, hey, if this is successful, how are we going to take this to scale? As opposed to, we'll wait till it shows up and is successful, and it's like, oh, well, now everything's out of sync and we don't have money in the right year to be able to go execute this. So I think that is a key part of this change, is making sure we have the end outcome in mind as we pursue all these different opportunities.
So I'll pick up on that pathway to scale. Yes, would love to see more of that roadmap up front. The reality is we can be very fast and agile in software. Hardware still requires methodical, deliberate, time-sensitive investments. And so understanding if this is successful, then XYZ on this timeline really allows your industry partners to take more risk. Especially on supply chain, warehousing, kind of building ahead of need. I think also, one of the ways I look at, is the Army successful in this new era, is what are the new businesses that are flocking to the Army's problems? And I don't have a quantitative assessment of what that looks like, but I think qualitatively, everybody in this room has seen a lot of new names coming to this problem space, a lot of new capital coming into this problem space. And I think that speaks well for how the Army is communicating their problem set, how industry is receiving it, and then what we think the kind of longevity of purpose is. Now, we all know whatever half of small businesses fail, so we'll see long-term how that reconciles. But I think that is another metric to look at is in the attempt to broaden, right, actually seeing real impact there.
The Silicon Valley Working Group does an annual survey of top 100 private or venture-backed firms specifically looking to do work in defense and national security. And what they find is the capital available is like 50 billion. And under federal contract in any federal agency that's national security related, including DoD, it's like 2 billion. So those companies will walk away. They're not going to stick around. The money, excuse me, I should say, the money will walk away. And they're going to walk away fast once they realize they knock on the door. It's this big giant bureaucracy. The words are there, the intent is there, but not really anything's changing practically on the ground for them. All right, quick software question, because I know that this hits everybody a little bit differently. It's for anyone on the panel, but General Gibbs referenced the speed of software used in the Army. How do you combine the time to achieve commercial speed and the time to achieve FedRAMP and IL tests required and the cost it takes to do that? Doesn't know, no particular person. If nobody, that's okay too.
Yeah, I would just say I don't have a specific answer to that. That is something that we are definitely working through, because ultimately with anything, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, you still have to build it. You have to test it. You have to prove that it's effective. You have to prove that it's safe. You have to characterize the reliability of it. That does take time. Where we get bogged down is in the the certifications and the ATO process. And so we are working to shorten that cycle time, using more interim authority to test, so we can get out in operational units in test situations or in training environments, and turn more quickly on software to be able to get capability out there faster.
So I actually think commercial may help solve the problem of FedRAMP and continuous ATO. If you look at several companies today, the investments that are being made in large language models, artifact generation, traceability between requirements and test, the barrier is lowering for industry to be able to respond to some of these more certification heavy requirements. There does still need to be an appetite on behalf of the government customer, though, to pick something up that's not certified and therefore does inherently have some risk, right, through the certification process, and helping foster that through. Because the one thing it is difficult to do entirely on your own dime, in fact impossible, is receive an ATO, because you don't have an authorizing official inside of every business in America, and you really need a government sponsor to kind of carry that over the threshold. I have seen companies use CRADAs for that, which can be one way to kind of co-invest in that process. But I think the combination of commercial investment in tools to make it faster, and then kind of the government's willingness to go that extra mile, accept that little bit of risk where it can make sense, is probably critical to increasing and accelerating those certifications.
I agree. Quick rejoinder, it's a related question for you, Mr. Manning. So how do you reconcile the desire for commercial solutions and the defense need for right to repair that excludes commercial solutions? As we all know, this is a hill Sec Army is going to die on. So.
Yeah, so I'll speak more from a technologist perspective. So I do not think the two are mutually exclusive. So I think we have some follow-on panels that will talk more on the contracting side of how do we structure contracts to get after that appropriately, to address industry's concerns regarding intellectual property and the Army's concerns about being able to rapidly repair equipment on the battlefield or a deployed scenario. So I think we want to do both, and we welcome the input from the broader community of how do we get to address the concerns of both industry as well as address the needs of the Army.
Great. I know there will be a lot of overlap with our discussion and others later, so I'm happy to defer some of the more specific questions. We have the next question, General Gibbs from PEO Soldier Representative. Regarding the challenge of transferring new technology to a program of record, how are you unblocking the path for technology that impacts multiple programs or programs that don't necessarily fall within one neat capability? Is it cross-cutting initiatives like C2 Fix or something else altogether?
Well, C2 Fix has definitely been a big part of what we've done over the last couple of years. Had tremendous success with the formations that we've worked with using a trail boss approach within ASALT, which is it's not just an ASALT effort. It brings in the right folks from AFC to include the labs and the user community out on the ground, really driving the cross-cutting solutions. On the requirement side, again, I go back to characteristics and needs statement. And the work that we're doing to drive cross-cutting solutions there, opening up really how we do requirements and getting away from just defining very specific things. We're very good in the Army when it comes to defining requirements. We talk about a very specific thing that is defined out of a user community, and we have multiple, as you know, the maneuver community down at Fort Benning, aviation at Fort Rucker, and so on. We then fund those things in very specific divisions within our headquarters DAG8, and then they get assigned out to PEOs, which are very siloed in ways as well. So starting with the requirements, we're trying to drive those communities together to work cross-cutting problems. And not to speak on behalf of ASALT, but one of the things that ASALT is already doing to double down on the trail boss approach is taking a task organizing approach to getting at some of these cross-cutting efforts. So building a team around problems, pulling expertise from multiple PEOs so that we have all the expertise needed to create a program plan to deliver an integrated solution from the start.
Was it okay he spoke for ASALT?
We'll give him a bye. He used to work at ASALT. So. Yeah. So what comes to mind regarding that question for me is, we've read the Forged Act and the Speed Act, and what's emerging in the NDAA. I think from the headquarters DA perspective, there's ongoing conversation is the value of looking at things from a more portfolio perspective versus individual programs perspective. So we'll continue to review how we do our business and go, hey, how do we make sure we're tapping into technology that can address multiple capabilities and not just go, that technology is for this program, and not be looking more broadly. So
thank you for referencing the reform bills. That's on my list. As you know, we didn't quite get there, but I want to briefly go to AI since we're on software broadly speaking as a topic right now. And, sometimes I sit back in my non-technical world that you all work in, and I'm like, it seems in Washington, the solution is just pour some AI on it and, that'll solve it. It's the new cyber. Just give it some cyber and things will be fixed. But let's talk practically speaking about how, in the last administration, there was a lot of guidance about integrating, incorporating, scaling, using everything AI. But it's not applicable everywhere. It's not going to be useful everywhere. And it's also probably more useful in things that we're not talking about enough, like contracting. The perfect place, I think, for large language models, but I'm not a contracting officer. So maybe each of you just quickly give your take on just what does this mean? Just use it more, integrate it more, buy it more, and how that's changing any part of your work every day. And then maybe related, we have a company here, I'm sure they speak for many companies, really small shop, dozen or so people, AI engineers. Like I said, this is the sort of, they're knocking on the door again. I know General Lowry said to talk to Miss Moyer, and then to also check Army open solicitations. So I would point you to that. But I'm guessing that, I don't know, but for AI companies, how do they showcase their capabilities? Where do they go? Where do they start? If that's part of your question, if it's not the same answer. Okay. Anything AI, go ahead.
All right. I like to, when I talk about AI, kind of go back in time just a little bit, right? Okay. So all the engineers and scientists in the Army, my role is, hey, where are we going with engineers and scientists? And so what's an engineer and what's a scientist? An engineer, I would define as someone who uses science to create useful things. And I would say the scientist is someone who creates new science to use. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to go back and say, when was the science first created for AI to use, it actually goes back to 1943 for the first neural networks. And so I hear a lot of, hey, technology moves really fast. Science, creating new science moves a little slower than that. I think our little catchphrase is, hey, it took 80 years to have an overnight success on AI. So kind of starting there. And so I think about AI and its application And I think a lot, I mean, what comes to mind to me is I think most people in this room were around when the first iPhone came out. And the first iPhone that came out it was a phone with your songs on it, right? And now it's a camera, and now it's an internet device, and now it's everything. And it's a computer that we have in our hands. And so, but that came about through iteration with users, continual iteration with users. And I think what we're going to discover in AI is whether we're iterating it to write contracts, or we're iterating on it to do the MDMP process and staff work, or whether it is embedded on drones to then go seek out our adversaries. Those are all going to be use cases that emerge by us taking minimum viable products in particular AI spaces, and then taking them and injecting it and iterating with units. So that's really how I think about AI. It's really, we're going to have to embrace the DevOps construct of tech maturation and move very quickly. But I think we don't even know yet what the really promising uses of it are. And we're not going to know that until we start, or we're starting it, until we continue to iterate on it.
So there's a couple ways that I think about AI. Within AFC, we're using it in a number of ways. I already mentioned how we're using LLMs to help us better analyze and write new requirements. We're also using it on threat analysis as we look at the threat environment and relate that to the requirements that we're producing in the future operating environment. On the operational side and what we're developing, I also think when it comes to operationalizing AI, I think we still have a lot of work to do on the business model. For example, who owns the algorithms that are cross-cutting? Where do they reside? Is it at the tactical edge? Is it reach back to the cloud? And what's the business model for those over time? And how do we account for what I call the care and feeding of those algorithms? They will need to be retrained over time. There will need to be continual testing done to really determine that they're not learning things that we don't want, behaviors that would be counter to what we're looking for. But we see obviously the tremendous potential. I talked about collaborative behaviors, collaborative autonomy between unlike systems. That is to me, one of the great cases where if we can get that right, that is game-changing technology to have a formation of robots that can move forward and make that first contact with the enemy that our Army senior leaders talk about so often. But it's actually a very complicated thing to put into practice and have that AI know when human input or decision is needed versus acting alone, because I don't think you're ever going to completely take the human out of the loop.
I agree with that, or at least for Congress's viewpoint.
I view AI first and foremost as an infrastructure challenge. AI requires a tremendous amount of data, modeled, labeled, available in a common ecosystem. That's been, I think, the perennial challenge of adopting it broadly into the DoD, where we have seen, I think, great improvements on both the business and government side is the use of it in business operations, logistics, things that are readily modeled, that have true big data problems that we've invested heavily in helping solve prior to the AI. I don't want to call it a revolution because it's not going to end, but the AI uptick. I think the next frontier, frankly, is then how do you start to mimic that infrastructure and make it available at increasingly lower echelons and smaller platforms. And that's where, Moore's Law and the semiconductor industry and the ability to put very high capacity compute very far forward is going to change, I think, how we think about deploying AI at the edge. But it comes down to, you still have an infrastructure challenge. The hardware alone is not enough. It comes to the data models and the curation of that data. And so I think Next Gen C2 is going to be one of the probably first Army frontiers that really encounters some of these challenges and how to confront and move past them. But I'm encouraged. When I look at AI, I think about my kids, right? And I think about the young soldiers that are joining the Army today. And they are power users, right? My son can look up anything in Microsoft Copilot and make my Google search look, just old and busted. So I'm excited for us to put more tools in their hands and through things like TIC, see how they evolve and use them. Because I don't even think that our old brains can comprehend all the possible use cases that it's going to deliver in the future.
So we have just a few more minutes left. And so I do want to get to the memo signed earlier in the month, the Unleashing U.S. Military Drone Dominance, along with General Mingus's announcement of an Army-led drone joint task force. So there's obviously a lot of momentum towards this problem. And it's obviously not just drone, counter-drone, but also counter-counter. It's not just aerial, but it's also about the industrial base, as has been the theme here this morning. So what meaningful steps are being taken today to identify, strengthen, and broaden the drone industrial base for the Army? And whose job is it to care? Anyone or all of you? Amber, we'll start with you.
Well, we certainly care, right, on our side. It's a big business. We think the way that war is being fought today in Europe, it's certainly a business that the U.S. Army needs to look at and invest in seriously. From my perspective, I think the biggest challenge that the Drone Dominance Initiative unleashes is the interoperability between these very disparate systems. They speak different languages. They don't all advertise their position location information in a common way. And, you know, in talking to the Trail Boss teams and others in the Army lately, one of the challenges I think that's out there is airspace deconfliction, coordination, and planning. And so I'm excited about the prospects. I'm a little fearful of the pace of adoption because without that kind of common data infrastructure, I think we will struggle to see one another, coordinate with one another, control across boundaries. But I think this is where TIC is really starting to expose this, I would say, much more rapidly than I've seen previously. Years ago, we would have spent 3 or 4 years fielding the drones and then realized that they can't fly together. Now we've spent 3 months and confronted that reality. And so I think positive change, but that's where my mind goes on drone dominance. It briefs well. It will be interesting to see in implementation how commanders are able to bridge all these disparate systems in a relatively small battle space.
Yeah, so whose job is it to care? ASALT and AMC are very active at going, what do we need to be doing to improve the U.S. industrial base in this particular area? Whether it's use of our organic industrial base for components or producing some quantity of them, whether it's incentivizing an increased investment in the U.S. industrial base in production of drone capabilities, but it is absolutely a priority. I think the Unleashing Drone Dominance memo, we were limited on being able to use drones that maybe have are not manufactured in places that we would prefer them to be manufactured. And now it's more open to be able to iterate and figure out what do we want to use these things for. So I think that's a good thing. At the same time, we also have to tackle that industrial base piece and grow the U.S. industrial base so that we can trust what we're going to put in the hands of soldiers to operate the way it's supposed to.
And so Amber and Chris had a lot of the key points from AFC's perspective as well. Really, it's all of our responsibility across the enterprise to care about drone dominance. A couple things that AFC has done over the past few years to lead in this space is directed requirements. We've realized that our programs of record just have not been responsive with bringing in the latest technology, and so we've used directed requirements. And a few that I'll give as examples: loitering munitions. We call it the Lethal Unmanned Systems Directed Requirement, which we use to really get capability out there, develop TTPs, but also using this buy, try, and decide approach as we look towards the program of record, which we call LASSO, Low Altitude Stalking and Strike Ordnance. The next one was company level UAS, allowed us to get some of the latest technology in that space out to our formations, and we have those out in TIC formations right now. And then the brigade level UAS is in the mix, working to get that one resourced to get the latest technology. So the .mil PFP integration is one of the key challenges of scaling up and going 10x on production. And some of the things that we've learned in our recent TIC formations is that we may have to revisit or relook some of the models. The desire is that we don't have soldiers heads down in controllers, We want 11 Bravo infantrymen to be infantrymen. We don't want them to be drone operators. So you put more UAS out into those formations, then they're either going to sit there, or you're going to dedicate more soldiers to that. So that drives the need to get away from a one-to-one approach with UAS to get a one-to-many. And so that's definitely where we're thinking is how can we accelerate not just the adoption, and production of drones, but accelerate development of this, collaborative type of approach so that we can get one operator controlling many UAS out there.
So the panel topic today to kick this off was, let me see, requirements, contracting, and procurement. In 60 seconds each, before we thank you for your generous time and terrific insights today, what is the one thing you want to be sure this audience hears from you or your office or your organization today on any of those three topics? Chris, you're up first.
Yeah, so I think what I'll just kind of reemphasize is this shift in our thinking regarding tapping into those other parts of innovation that our systems and processes haven't been really designed for. So how do we shift our systems so that we can discover the problems that we don't know we have and solve them, and then repurpose technology that's out there that somebody's using for something else to address something that we didn't think about applying. So I think that is going to get after the requirement side. How do we rapidly contract for that? And then ultimately, if it's promising, then go procure it.
Ultimately, for AFC, I think you're going to see continued increased use of broad problem statements that we're calling characteristics of need. And I would just encourage all of industry, if you haven't been to Austin and engaged with AFC, I'd recommend that you do that. And we have a number of ways. I've got a industry outreach lead, Julia McAdams, that every day, multiple engagements across the command, not only for me, but for our senior leaders. We have the Army Applications Lab. We call that the front door for industry. Which we really use to identify and accelerate those innovative technologies by linking them up with the right folks in the contracting community and the user community in our Army labs. A lot of times companies come to the table and they don't know what they don't know with respect to the defense industry, navigating the policy, navigating some necessary MIL standards, understanding and navigating requirements and seeing where they can fit in. So I just encourage that dialogue if you if there's companies out there that are looking to get into the space.
I'll say all the momentum is positive and trending in the right direction, right? From industry engagement to authorities to the funding available to solve these hard problems. From my perspective, keep it up and let's live up to our promises. I think it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint in terms of kind of proving out whether this great experiment works or not. All indications are good, right? So let's launch, let's start our mission. And I think industry is ready to do this alongside and be a partner. So we're excited. There's a lot of hard work and there's no growth without pain, as I've learned, but we'll live through the suck together.
That's right. And I encourage the Army to share, senior leaders to share success stories broadly. And when there's a fail, just own it fast, move on. I think there's a lot of latitude in Congress to let there be failures with this brand new crazy world that we're trying to enter together collectively. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning and launching the Hot Topics panel part of the day. Will you join me in thanking our panelists?